Working with a document from a library that has one or more of the document management features turned on, primarily we're talking about check-in and check-out, versioning, and content approval, does not make working with it in the authoring applications like Word, Excel, or PowerPoint any different. Those applications still work the way that they always have. What generally happens is when we first try to open the document, or as part of the save process, we're prompted for different information. We also might need to be aware of what things are enabled so that we know what we should be seeing or may not be seeing in the library itself. We currently have a document that's been kind of going through an editing process. It was uploaded once as version 1.0, and we've edited it once and saved it as a draft, version 1.1. The way this particular library is set up, that means that the author, the admins, and anybody who has editing permissions can see version 1.1. But those with lesser permissions, like somebody who only has read permissions in this library, when they come in, they will see this document just like we are. But if they open it, they're going to see version 1.0 without the changes that we made, not version 1.1. Everybody comes to the same library, everybody sees the same document, or at least it appears that way, but they will see different versions depending on major and minor drafts as well as their permissions. So, how do we, as people with editing permissions, go in and look at the versions that we want to see? Well, we use the Edit menu. And the secret for all of this is always the Edit menu. Of course, you could do it from the ribbon as well. I'm kind of old school and I like to do it right from on screen. So we're going to expand this particular menu. Of course, we can edit, we can share, we can follow. We also can click on the ellipsis to see the open menu in full. And what we now can see is that there is a version history. When we click or tap this, it's going to open the version history for this particular document. If you have permissions, you may be able to delete all of the versions except for the current one. You may be able to delete all of the draft versions. In other words, you don't need to see old work. Those are things that we talk about in a lot more detail in the administering class, because usually users can't even see version history. You may not be able to see version history, but I wanted to show you that it is here, whether you have permissions to see it or not, because this is the powerful part of versioning. We can see that we have the original, the date and time it was uploaded, and who uploaded it. Because we have content approval also enabled, it tells us that that was approved and gives us the title. Then we can see the draft that was created, when it was created, who created it. Notice that it is currently in a draft status. We can even see the size of the document. And most importantly, on the far right, this is where we get to see the comments. When anyone saves a version, they are prompted for comments. And I told you that that's not required, but I would require it, and this is why. Ultimately, if you go through, say, 20 edits on a document, you don't have to open every one of those to see what was changed. You should be able to simply scroll down and look at the list of history. Oh, we did some formatting here. We did a spell check here. We inserted section 5.1 here, whatever it may be. This is what makes versioning so easy to use when you want to see the historical changes of a document. Now, of course, the other benefit that we talked about is that you can go in and look at old versions. So even though we're currently on version 1.1, if we wanted to see what 1.0 looked like, it has its own open menu. We can click and we can view it, or we can even restore it. In other words, if something bad happened with 1.1, maybe we accidentally deleted 10 pages of content, we could say, no worries, we're just going to go back and restore it. Or here's one that happens way too often. Your supervisor gives you a laundry list of all the things they want you to change in a document. You spend hours doing that. You show it to them and they go, yeah, well, but I kind of liked it the other way. Can you just put it back? If you didn't have versioning, you would be stuck. But with versioning, if that happens, all you have to do is come back and say restore. So this is a very powerful little window that we have here. It gives us all of the history as well as the functionality that we may need to use versions. When we're done with it, it simply is its own window, so we can close it out. And that, of course, takes us back to the library, which was always open in the background. Now, we're not quite done with versioning yet, because we created a major version, 1.0. We made an edit, which is a minor version, 1.1. But we know that not everybody can see 1.1. So if we decided at this point that we were ready to publish this, that everybody who can read the library should be able to see this, then we need to convert it from a minor draft to a published major version. Again, we do that from the Open menu. It's very descriptive. Above where it says version history, it says publish a major version. A small window comes up that lets you either keep the comments that you already had, or you can change it. You might want to say, major version approved on a certain date or something like that. You can keep it, you can leave it, that's up to you. It really doesn't matter. What's important is that you click OK. We have just upgraded this document from version 1.1 to version 2.0. Now, if we only had versioning turned on, that would mean instantly anybody with read permissions would be able to see the new version 2.0 and it'd all be good. But we have the third element of document management enabled. And so currently, only Michael Brooks, the author, and people who are administrators can see this particular version. Because content approval says that the author or the editor and the admins are the only ones that can view the document until it's approved by an administrator. How do we know that? Well, when content approval is enabled on a library, a column is added to the far right-hand side called approval status. Anything that was already in the library is approved. Anything that has been changed and is awaiting approval says pending. Now, you have to be an admin to be able to do this. I happen to be an admin, or at least signed on as Michael I am. So once again, an administrator would go into the Open menu. We should now be familiar with all of the things that we can do here. Viewing and editing the properties, viewing the document in the browser using the web app, or editing it in the browser, checking it out or checking it in, working with the version history, and the last step that we have, the only thing that we've ever done having to do with content approval at this point, is where it says Approve Reject. This again is a very simple window. The admins have the opportunity to approve it and say, yes, it's okay, to reject it and say, no, for whatever reason, I don't want to show this content in my library, or technically they could keep it as pending. Hopefully, if somebody rejects your document, they will add a comment telling you why. You may be wondering why they would reject it. It could be that you accidentally put it in the wrong library, that it belongs somewhere else. It could be that it's just not appropriate content for this particular library. It could be that you maybe need to do a little bit more editing, maybe tighten it up or do some spell checks, or maybe they found some factual errors that they want you to fix. It really is hard to say, but there are a lot of reasons, don't take it personally, that they may not be approving it right now. So if your document is rejected, remember, you can still come back into the library, and you, as the author or editor, will be able to see that it's been rejected, and you can open this window and see their comments. If, on the other hand, as we hope, it's approved, they probably won't add any comments to that. They'll just mark it approved, and they'll say OK. When something is approved, we get to see its status has changed on the right-hand side. Now, everybody who has permissions to read this library can see your content. And that rounds out all three of the features that we use. I really recommend, if you have the opportunity, to try to work with these one at a time. You might do that in your My Site because you can control these features from within your own documents library. But working with check-in and check-out on its own, turning that off, and then working with versioning on its own and turning it off, and working with content approval and turning it off really does make it more simple to see what's happening when. But really, the most important thing to recognize is check-in and check-out only happens when you first open a document to edit it and when you save a document and it wants to know if you want to check it back in. That's it. Content approval is something that you may or may not have to worry about, depending if you have administrator privileges. Just know that you may be the only one who can see your content until an administrator approves it. Versioning, of course, is where things can get a little more complicated. No versioning, major versioning, or major and minor versions can all accumulate. Just know that if you have permissions to see them, that you'll be able to go into the Open menu and the version history and see what's been happening. So in summary, what you now know is that working with files in their authoring applications like Word, Excel, and PowerPoint is the same. The functionality there does not change. SharePoint has nothing to do with it. But SharePoint does have document management features to help us. If these are enabled in any combination, they'll need to be addressed, and of course SharePoint will tell you what you need to do. Most of these are going to be either when you open the file or when you're saving it, or as we said with versioning, things that you can look at from within the library. If checkout is enabled, you'll be notified that the file will be checked out anytime you choose to edit it. When you're done editing a checked out file, you need to be sure to check it back in at some point. Maybe not now if you're not quite done with it yet, but eventually so people can see your changes. If versioning is enabled, You'll be prompted when saving a file to add a comment. You may also be asked if you want to save the file as a published or draft version. Just slow down and read what it's asking you to do. If you have permissions, you can review all of that versioning of a file by selecting Versions History from the Open menu on the item in the library itself. And with proper permissions, you can create and edit files within the library. If content approval is enabled, though, new or edited files will only be visible to the author and admins until approved. But once approved, everyone with library permissions will be able to see the file. None of these features have to be used. All of them can be used, or they can be used in any combination. It depends on the purpose of your library and how much you need to control what happens with documents, or who can do what or see what with those same documents. But putting them all together, this is when we see the tremendous possible benefits of managing documents within SharePoint libraries instead of our good old file shares.